Hello and welcome to Let's Review. Magic is a pretty popular factor in an awful lot of media. There's a reason why the phrase swords and sorcery goes hand in hand with the fantasy genre. But in most games, the magic user tends to be the guy stuck at the back, throwing out spells and dying horribly whenever anything comes near him. Lichdom Battlemage tries to do something a little bit different, casting you as a lone wizard, smiting your way through hundreds of enemies. And does it succeed in that aim? Well, to answer that, we start the same place as we always do, with the gameplay. Lichdom's gameplay has two primary elements, and the one most touted by its developers was its crafting system.
This is the crafting system of Lichdom Battlemage. So it's based on the sigils that you have equipped at the moment. So if you look at the moment, I have Necromancy, Ice, and Lightning equipped. Now, we have a large number of components that can be used to create various different kinds of spells. And they use a fairly standard system for color coding. So, we have whites, which are the most standard and weak, then greens, blues, purples, oranges, and finally reds. Now, reds are extremely difficult to get. Now, this is the synthesis system, which allows you to combine multiple things in order to create stronger versions. So, if we look, for example, we have this orange here, and I can combine it with this lob and this balance thing. And because I'm upgrading it right the way to red level, which is the highest, I now have an annihilating nova of the supernova, which, as you can see, has various statistics. Now, that's not actually a spell yet, that's still just a spell component. So if I go to my crafting system, and if I wanted to, say, create a high-level Lightning Nova spell, we could go to there, and select that. Now, it only has one upgrade slot. Different things will often have different things, or different numbers of upgrade slots. And then the last thing you need to do is use either a Mastery, a Destruction, or a Control. Control augments are primarily used to create spells that affect your opponents in ways that have effectively crowd control effects. So, for example, Control on an ice spell will cause it to freeze your opponent in place. Control on an electricity spell will cause it to lock your enemy in place while they get shocked constantly, doing not a lot of damage, but preventing them from moving. Masteries are all about combining different spells together in order to create powerful effects, and Destruction is about straight up damage. So, for example, if I put in this Eroding Destruction of Penetrating, now I can quite quickly compare this to the spell I have equipped, so you will notice it's actually doing less damage than the current Nova I have equipped, but that's purely because it just doesn't have that many upgrade slots, which means that even though it's a very high level thing, it's actually not that useful. So I'm actually not going to create it. There are other things you can do as well. For example, I can look at some of my older spells. These are all spells that I've used in the past but no longer need. And if I wanted, I could break them down. So that, for example, is an old shield. So if I break it down, I can theoretically get back one of the components. But I'm not going to do that because I never found the need to do it. You can also reforge, which is used to get rid of a lot of the items you don't need. So I used it to get rid of an awful lot of the white elements, and quite often the greens as well, because particularly later on you will start getting lots and lots of purples and blues. The various spells you can equip fall into various categories, but they are all based on one of three button combinations. So, at the top of the individual circle you have your targeted spell, which is done with the left mouse button. You have your Nova spell, which is created by blocking at the right moment. And you have your area of effect spell, which is created by holding both the left and right mouse buttons down together. You also have a shield, which does exactly what you would expect a shield to do. And fundamentally, that is it for the crafting system of Lichdom Battlemage.
I actually kind of like this system, although it does fall into the classic problem of promising more than it delivers. Now don't get me wrong, there are an awful lot of spell combinations, but most of them fall into the same beams or AoE effects, just with different elemental effects and different stats. Overall, it's a pretty solid crafting system, but the result of it is you tend to fall into a little bit of a routine once the actual combat starts.
In many ways, Lichdom plays like a first-person shooter. As you can see, your perspective is first person, and you will get attacked by enemies who will sometimes attack at range, and sometimes like to get up close and personal. You will only ever have 3 varieties of magic on hand at once, which can be used through the 1, 2 and 3 number keys, or I can scroll through them with the mouse wheel. Now, what I just used was Necromancy, which is a very useful one for when you're facing large groups of enemies, because if you infect an enemy with Necromancy, it won't kill them, but it will infect them, so that when they die, they will rise again as your undead servant. So, my other primary spells are Ice, for which I primarily use Ice Beams to freeze my enemies in place, in the form of crowd control, and Lightning, which I use as my primary damage dealer. Now what I'm currently demonstrating is effectively the New Game Plus mode, so as such it is quite difficult. And you will notice that guy has just come back to my undead minion, and I've picked up another crafting element, which you will quite often get when the enemies die. As I stated in the crafting segment, there are 3 types of attack. That happens when I dodge, or when I block rather. And you'll notice that I am able to do a short teleport. The number of times you can do this is based on the kind of shields that you have equipped. If I now demonstrate an area of effect spell. And the enemies are quite often partial to teleporting and other similar attacks. Now you will notice that I have 3 shield segments down in the lower corner, and they keep regenerating. This is because I'm currently playing on one of the lower difficulties just to demonstrate easier. On the difficulties of Battlemage and above, which is the default difficulty setting, a shield segment that has been broken won't regenerate unless you find a shield sphere that will regenerate it for you. And there are quite a lot of enemies who can knock an entire segment down in one hit. Needless to say, these guys are kind of annoying to fight. And honestly, that's basically all there is to the combat. There's a few different varieties of enemies, and there are boss monsters that can change things up a bit. But ultimately, that's basically it. And you'll notice that my undead minions have absolutely no relation to the creatures they spawn from. So, for example, if I hit this creature with Necromancy, and then kill it, and then kill it, the skeleton that spawns from him will have absolutely no relation to whatever creature it was. And ultimately, that is it for the combat system of Lichdom. It's fights like this, over and over and over again.
The main problem with this combat system is that once you find something that works for you, there's no real reason ever to change it up. Personally, I discovered Necromancy, Ice Beams and Ball Lightning, and after that I never felt the desire to try anything else again, in spite of the variety of magic offered to me. And as a result, the game ends up starting to feel very repetitive. And this isn't helped by the level design. The maps themselves are huge, but they're very, very linear. There's only ever one path through them. And you quickly get into the same pattern over and over again. Group of enemies spawn, take them out. And while there are certainly moments of pure awesome during some of those fights, there's far too much tedium linking them. And then we get into the game's 2 other big problems. The first of which is massive difficulty spikes that yo-yo all over the place. And when you combine that with the other problem, you get into serious issues, because that problem is a truly terrible checkpoint system.
This is one of the game's save spheres, and when you die you will be resurrected at the last one that you passed. You will keep your experience and crafting materials intact, but all of the enemies will respawn, meaning that you have to fight them again, and when these spheres start to become very spread out later, you will often have to repeat the same dull fights over and over again.
The boss fights in particular can be difficult to the point of being unfair, and more often than not, the save sphere will actually be back quite a ways, which becomes very annoying very quickly. Frankly, with this much combat in the game, Lichdom needed something else to break it up, and in most games, I would be looking for a strong story to do that and keep me invested. And does Lichdom have one? Well, the story centres around two characters, the Griffin and the Dragon. One is male and one is female, and which is determined by your choice of character. The player will always play as the Dragon, because they are the one given the power to wield magical death and throw around fireballs and all that malarkey. The Griffin, on the other hand, gets powers related to help them scout, so teleportation and possibly invisibility is implied. These powers have been granted to you by the mysterious wizard Roth, who has recruited you to fight an evil cult who have taken over the land and given each of the two protagonists a particular personal reason for hating them. And can you guess what those reasons are? Well, you are looking at me, so they must be cliched. Well, the male is obvious, they murdered his wife. As for the female, no, a second murder is too obvious, too boring. So I would go with a kidnapping of another close family member. Female again, obviously. So a daughter? No, a sister seems more likely. 2 for 2. Their motivation is pulled straight from the Big Book of Fantasy Clichés Volume 1, and frankly, they're just set up really weakly. We barely get to see either the sister or the wife before whatever happens, and as a result there is no real emotional connection. I don't really care about these people or what motivates them, because they're just not very interesting as protagonists. Well, boring protagonists are nothing new. In these sort of things, it's more often than not the villain that really makes it work. Yeah. Villain's a bit on the weak side. Painfully, yeah. I can't remember any of their names. I can't remember why I was supposed to hate them. And in fact, the only two that are even vaguely memorable are the two twins, who are completely crazy and are heavily implied to be, doing a Lannister? Oh, please tell me that's not also a cliche. The creepy incestuous twins. It's more of a proto-cliche. Give it a few years and it may well become a full-blown cliche. Oh, that is just wrong. And that is why it is becoming a cliche. It's a very quick, very easy method of establishing that your villains are royally messed up. Yeah, I can't actually deny that. The rest of Lichdom's villains are pretty dull, and unfortunately, the story suffers from the same problem as the gameplay. It's very repetitive. You fight some monsters, and then Griffin turns up for a bit of a chat. You fight some monsters, and then the villains show up for a bit of a taunt. You fight some monsters, and then the villains run away. Repeat ad nauseum. And game designers, little tip for you. You can pull the villain taunts you and then runs away trick exactly once. Any more than that, and it just makes the villain look weak. Not necessarily. Some villains can taunt you throughout the entire course of the game without appearing weak. Look at, say, Handsome Jack from Borderlands 2. Yes, but the difference there is distance. Jack spends the whole game taunting you over the radio. If he'd actually been physically running up to you saying, "I'm sure I could kill you easily," and then running away, that would not have made him look strong. That would have made him look like he was actually afraid to face you. Because of the way it's worked there, it's more like he's standing at the top of a really big hill and yelling at you that if you actually do manage to make it up there, then he'll stomp you into mulch. But until you do, it's not actually worth him coming down off of his hill to fight you. You only actually encounter Jack twice in the flesh in the entire game. Once when he knocks you aside to complete his own objective, and once again during the final confrontation. I suppose that is true, though you seem to have gone somewhat off topic. True, but honestly that's all there really is to say about the plot. because it's kind of bare bones thin. They do try and flesh it out with these memory rift things that operate in a similar way to audio logs from other games, but unfortunately they're also very samey and very repetitive. I lost track of the number of times I saw the twin sister get angry at one of her minions for failing her and pull out their life force. I got it the first time, I didn't need to see it another 10 or 15. Later on in the game, the plot just starts pulling elements straight from the air. It brings up armies and factions and alliances, and then forgets about them completely. Honestly, it kind of feels like somebody wrote this grand, epic story for this game, and then they didn't actually have the budget to put it all together, so they just ended up having to jam random bits and pieces in wherever they would fit. And honestly, the whole thing just doesn't feel cohesive. And what of the wizard who gives you your powers? What about him? You never learn a thing about him, not why he hates this cult, not why he works through people like you. I kept expecting there to be this big grand reveal where it turns out that he was the head of the cult all along and he was using you to sow chaos or just kill a lot of his minions off in some sacrifice to a dark god. But nope, he's just a magic guy who turns up and gives you superpowers. What more do you need? Lichdom's story is just a massive letdown. There was potential here, but none of it is lived up to, and frankly, that's just kind of sad. The art style for this game is pretty good overall. Each of the different locations is pretty striking and easy to tell apart at a glance. There's a lot of very nice creature design and monster work, and overall they look pretty good. And the characters, what few that there are, all look unique, and you can tell one from another. Overall, the art team did a pretty good job on this game. The graphics are probably the best thing about this game because, frankly, they look spectacular. The spell effects in particular are really incredible to look at, especially things like lightning when it's arcing around your hands and it just... oh, it looks good. CryEngine 3 continues to show itself as an engine that is excellent for games that just want to look really amazing, and Lichdom definitely does. Now, it is definitely a bit of a system hog, and it did lock up on me at least once, but overall, in the graphics department, the team did one hell of a job. The audio for this game is pretty good overall. The sound effects are solid, the music is quite nice, but one thing I do want to bring up is the frankly stellar voice cast, which includes Troy Baker, Jennifer Hale, Clancy Brown, Gina Torres, and Jamie Murray. That is a truly spectacular cast, and it's just a pity that they're not given more to do. Now, don't get me wrong, they all put in fine performances, but the script they're working from is just so bland and generic that there's not really anything for them to do with it. It feels like a waste of a cast of this quality, which sadly is a pretty good summation for a lot of Lichdom. Overall, though, the cast puts in excellent work, and I have to give them praise for that. So, did I enjoy Lichdom Battlemage? No, not really. Should you buy it? Definitely not at full price. While there was clearly an awful lot of love and effort put in by its developers, there are just too many problems with the game's pacing and repetitive nature. And while there are certainly moments of sheer awesomeness during the combat, say when you're trying out a new spell or when you get that critical hit at just the moment you need it, they're too few and far between, broken up by far too much tedium, facing hundreds and hundreds of the same repetitive enemies in the same sort of fights. Overall, there was a lot of potential in this game, but unfortunately very little of it was lived up to, and frankly that is just sad to see. Now, if you'll excuse me, I want to go figure out if I can make these gauntlets shoot lightning. I'll see you later.